Tony taught us a lot. He taught us a lot about the power of economics and the power of those that run our society. And I've just been reading this book by Andrew Fisher, The Failed Experiment. Have you all seen it yet? It's just come out. It's in the Radical Read series, and the Radical Read series is designed to promote discussion ahead of the general election on these issues. And Andrew's produced the first book, which is on economics, and he describes the failed experiment of essentially what happened after Thatcher came to power in 1979. And as he quite correctly points out, a lot of what Thatcher did, the way for it was paved by the appalling decision of the Labour government in 1976-77 to accept the IMF conditions on public spending controls and cuts and some degree of marketisation of the economy. Very minor compared to what happened later on, but nevertheless there was a kind of opening move there. And what Andrew points out is the way in which, for example, taxation has changed, in that the tax paid as a percent of gross income has moved from being direct taxation to indirect taxation, which obviously falls disproportionately on the majority of the poor rather than the very rich. And the way in which the tax burden has been systematically reduced from very high levels for the very richest people, traditionally by consensus in the 1950s, 60s and 70s, to now very low levels, and the way in which corporate taxation has also been reduced. And so the corporate taxation has gone down to around corporate taxes, corporation tax has gone down to about 18% from figures of 35 to 40% in the past. He also explains very carefully in this book the way in which first of all, there was the deregulation of the City of London by the Tories, particularly under Nigel Lawson, removing what they euphemistically called the corset on the banking system. In other words, banks could lend what they like, irrespective of the resources they had from which to lend. And the further deregulation that took place under Blair and Brown, and the speeches that Brown used to make, he's quoted extensively from them, to the annual shindig in the City of London, about how a Labour government appreciated and understood the importance of the City of London and wasn't going to put too many controls on it, wasn't going to restrict it in any way. And because he'd done all this, it had eliminated boom and bust. This was a year before the 2008 crash, the massive crash that took place then, and the panic that set in. And the government at that time did a couple of things right and lots of things wrong. The things it did right was initially to raise benefit and pension levels as a way of increasing expenditure within the economy as well as helping people, and also taking bank shares into public ownership. But it wasn't public ownership in the sense of nationalisation as we knew in the rail industry, which had many shortcomings but nevertheless was clearly publicly owned. Instead, it was a shareholding option which can be sold off at any time. So George Osborne could sell the stake in RBS straight away if he wanted to, or indeed any other bank. There is no discernible influence by government on the way that the banks operate at the moment, despite all of them receiving massive bailouts, all of them having majority government shareholdings on it. And when I've written to the Chancellor to ask why local businesses can't get loans in order to open up new premises and so on, he just says it's nothing to do with him, that's a matter for the bank. Sorry, he's the major shareholder in the bank, and he said it's absolutely nothing to do with him. I also recall John McDonnell and I meeting Tony Blair when he was Prime Minister for the most useless meeting we ever had, which was to discuss why Royal Mail were taking mail off the trains and putting it on the roads, why they were ending mail on rail. And Blair opened the meeting by saying, I promised to have this meeting with you, I've got 20 minutes, I'm not going to micromanage the Royal Mail or the railways. And John said, well, Tony, can we just say our piece first? He said, well, I've warned you. And so John then said his piece, and all Blair kept saying was, I'm not going to micromanage anything, that's a matter for the industry, that's a matter for the managers, it's nothing to do with me, I'm only the Prime Minister. And you should understand that I'm merely the Prime Minister in this situation. And after that, the meeting ended. It was less hostile than the meetings about Iraq, but just as useless. So we have to recognise a lot of the problems that we are facing are because of what the last Labour government did in terms of its management of the economy and the obsession that Blair and Brown had with marketisation privatisation, the obsession they had with private finance initiative, the massive cost of wasted money on the London Underground privatisation of maintenance contracts, all had to be brought back in-house at enormous cost, and the PFIs that have been imposed on hospitals like a massive millstone around the neck of every new hospital. It would have been cheaper, quicker, and more socially responsible to have lent the money through the through the normal Public Works Loans Board at lower rates of interest over a longer period of time, and the whole thing remains public. And I find it kind of weird when you go into a school. I remember going to a school and saying the teacher was saying to me, "I need a new desk." "Why are you telling me you need a new desk? Why don't you just call the caretaker and get one put in?" He said, no, I've got to ring the facilities company, and they've got to ring the owners of the PFI, and they've got to ring the bank to approve it. So to get a desk in a classroom requires somebody somewhere miles away in a finance institution to approve it. That is the destruction of our public services. So there's a lot of demands we need to make to go into the Labour manifesto of the next election. Obviously public ownership of the railway system, public ownership of the energy services, and public ownership of the English water industry. But above all, we need to say we've got to stop this whole PFI nonsense, bring those things back inside, and end the health legislation, which is basically a conveyor belt for the destruction of the National Health Service. The other issues that we've got to address are turning the minimum wage into a living wage, and we're having some success in that with local campaigns in my own borough, where we had an amazing local election result, not unconnected with the fact that the borough is a living wage employer, not unconnected with the fact that we have built a large number of council houses, but the biggest council house building programme in the country, and despite real problems about finding land and so on, and that's been effective and popular. And the other area really is the crucial one of housing. I have produced a private members bill on regulation of the private rented sector, which includes registration of landlords, registration of letting agencies, environmental conditions, energy efficient conditions, but above all rent control as well. I have people in my constituency who, on good wages, people, young professionals starting out in life, on good salaries, who are paying more than half their take-home pay in rent. They can't save anything. They're never going to be able to access council housing because they're not in any kind of priority need. And the prospect for them, despite having good education, good degrees, is one, paying back a massive student loan, and secondly, forevermore, paying a massive level of their salary in rents. And so I think we've got to just take the bull by the horns and control rents in the private sector. If we don't, in 5 years' time, there will be a critical mass of small landlords around the country that will become a political force on their own, which will prevent any government, or try and deter any government, from bringing in rent controls in the future. So Miliband made an interesting and welcome step in talking about regulation, but didn't go far enough on the rent controls itself. And the last thing I'm going to say, and I'll finish, is the politics of the day. Last week, UKIP won a few seats on the council and won a pretty big vote in the European elections. What do UKIP offer? Bile, unpleasantness, anti-immigration, anti-immigrant, subliminally totally racist message. And at the same time, they've got this character at the front who sort of exudes a kind of Stanley Baldwin-like mentality. I'm an ordinary guy, I like a pint, and I'm just standing up for my country. Does prejudice build houses? Does prejudice build hospitals? Does prejudice run railways? Do they actually have any solution to anybody's problems anywhere in the country? No. All they can offer is a sort of general nastiness towards anyone that they perceive not to like, and a kind of bankrupt xenophobia. We don't have to get in the gutter with UKIP, and we shouldn't get in the gutter with UKIP. We should be proud of the contribution that's been made to our living standards by people that have chosen to come and live in this country, that work incredibly hard. We should be proud that we are, all of us, anti-racist and would never accept a racist agenda. The way to mobilise people is on housing, is on health, is on education, is on jobs, is on real social security, not the fear, which is all that they offer. And have some respect for humanity, human rights and humankind. Think of all those people that are dying in the Mediterranean trying to escape oppression, poverty at the hands of guns provided by the West. Let's think of the humanitarian issues that face the world, and we can take people with us on that. But if we descend to the level of UKIP and the race is right, we won't win the next election. We will lose that election, and we will have done ourselves a great disservice. We owe it to an awful lot of people to end austerity, to propose something better and something different, and above all, educate people into the realities of life. There's enough money, enough wealth, enough material, enough food in the world to go round. There isn't enough money, wealth and material in the world to keep a minority of people in super wealthy conditions while the majority are in poverty. It's the old socialist argument. If we share it out, there's enough to go round. If we don't share it out, people die because of the poverty that they're facing. We know which side we're on. We know how we can go forward and win an election. Thank you very much.